to Senator Gary Stubblefield from District 6. He's on the line. Senator Stubblefield, welcome back, sir.
Well, good morning, Paul.
Good morning. Hey,
I like your morning shows.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you very much. How's the I know you had something to do with cattle, right? A couple days ago, and it was very, very cold. Everything okay? I mean, like 0 degrees out there.
Yes, it was very, very cold. I think it was this morning. It was like 0 here with wind chill about -2. Well, maybe they'll get rid of some of the fire ants. I hope so.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
But keep in mind, it's supposed to be 70 on Sunday, so.
Yeah. Well,
that's Arkansas weather.
That's exactly right. I was about to say that's what they say about Arkansas weather. So tell our listeners. So we've got listeners in both corners of the state, and as well as Little Rock, Stuttgart, Russellville. Just tell us real quick again. District 6 geographically, where are we talking about?
District 6 includes Johnson County, Logan County, Franklin County, and Yale County.
All right. It's a pretty big district.
4 counties in west central Arkansas.
Okay. All right. So, Senator Stubblefield, we're coming up on this special session this year. And, of course, last week we had those budget hearings, and we had the news that, I guess it'll be the 4th year in a row. We've increased spending. Going to be increasing spending, according to what the governor's proposing, $172 million. Obviously, a big deal of that is a big chunk of that increase is going into the DHS budget. What are your thoughts on, where what do limited government conservatives do when we see the government continue to grow?
Well, first of all, Paul, most of these new dollars, most people know, go to public schools and human services. Those are 2 of the big 6 that we talked about during last week. These are called pre-budget hearings. I don't put a lot of emphasis on them because the real meat will come whenever we start with the budget hearings on February the 12th. That's where legislators really need to get down to the specifics and ask questions. And by the way, I would like to apologize to the constituents in my district and to the citizens of the state of Arkansas because I've been here 7 years, and I've sat through those budget hearings and watched as they transpired. No one really asked any real specific questions, and they were voted out. I'm hoping this year's going to be different because we're going to ask some very down to earth specific questions about how our tax dollars are being spent, and any of that revenue that's left over needs to come back to the general fund. So I'm hoping this year will be different because I just hope and pray that some legislators will step up to the plate and ask some tough questions about how our tax dollars are being spent. Mm-hmm. As far as the pre-budget hearing, we listened to, like I said, the big 6. You've got public school fund, Department of Human Services, Department of Health, Department of Corrections, Department of Community Corrections, and there's one more, higher ed. And whenever I sit in on these hearings, it reminds me a lot of the code talkers back in World War II, the Navajo code talkers. I'm sure you remember that. Yeah. Because you hear these explanations of why these agencies need all this surplus funds, and it's a whole litany of speculations and assumption, and they use their different methodologies and of why they need it and how they need it. Well, that's not going to work on February the 12th. They're going to have to come up with a whole lot better ideas. And let me give you an illustration. Last Monday, I chair state agencies now since Eddie Joe Williams left. We had the Arkansas Department of Corrections come before us, and I don't know if your listeners are aware of how the farm operation is run at the Arkansas Department of Corrections. But here's an agency that the farm operations, we loan them somewhere in the neighborhood of $5.2, $5.4 million every year to plant a crop. Now the farm operation has like 16,000 acres. They've got 2,000 head of beef cattle. They've got 1,300 head of a swine operation, a large poultry operation, hundreds of tractors, hundreds and hundreds of other pieces of equipment, high-dollar equipment. And and free labor, by the way. Don't forget that.
Mm-hmm.
And we give them $5.2 million every year that's never repaid. It's never been repaid. Now, if you gave the average farmer out here who knows a little bit about farming those kind of assets, and they could not make it, they could not make a profit with free labor and all those things being paid for by the taxpayers, they wouldn't be in business.
Mm-hmm.
They would not be in business.
Right.
And yet we're doing that with the Arkansas Department. Those are the kind of inefficiencies that we need to look at, because I don't think the Arkansas taxpayers are going to continue to want to subsidize these kind of operations.
No, we don't. We certainly don't. We're talking with Senator Gary Stubblefield. Do you think it'll go beyond tough questions? I mean, is there the political will, for example, in the higher chamber, the Senate, is there the political will to say, you know what, the executive branch thinks we need to spend X, but we think we need to spend Y, and Y is less than X? Do you think there's the political will to do that?
I'm not sure. I'm really not sure. I do know that all these states, these 31 states that expanded Medicaid, they're in real trouble. And they're having to come up with funds, and the only way they can come up with funds is to take it from places, and those people who are on these waiting lists, I think the number somewhere across the nation is 650,000 disabled people, eligible people that are on the waiting list for Medicaid. They can't get on it because we've got 12 million able-bodied people on this program. Mm-hmm. And I was reading the other day, of course I already knew this, that 25% of the people that's on this, they're supposed to be making a $13 a month payment on their premiums. Well, only 25% pay that. And more than three-fourths of the people on Arkansas Works show zero income last year. Mm-hmm. Zero income.
Yeah, and if you don't pay that $13 a month, nothing happens. You still get to keep your plan.
No, you get to keep your plan. In fact, the only way they can get it back is through the lottery, which makes no sense at all to me. But the fact of the matter is, we cannot. There's no way this is sustainable. It's just it just won't work.
Yeah.
And if these other states, these non-expansion states, should they decide to expand, then we've got a real problem. We've got a real problem.
Yeah, no doubt. It's really, really bad. And I'm glad that you mentioned Medicaid expansion. And you mentioned corrections as well. I mean, there has been a lot of attention on this program. We did it, yesterday, and your colleague Senator King was on last week, and talking about the uptick in crime. We do have what I think is a pattern of people who are not serving out their sentences, and then they're getting out. And we're talking about violent offenders.
Correct.
There was a home invasion in Fayetteville. The guy should have never been out. He had been arrested several times before for a bank robbery. And so you have these, and so I said yesterday, Senator Stubblefield, I was just like, there's a lot of things that a vast majority of Arkansans agree that the government should do. And I think one of those is that we keep criminals behind bars. And the other thing are things like roads. I think everybody thinks, hey, government does need to pay for roads. So they don't need to raise their taxes to do it because we're already giving them money to do these things. But when the government goes and invents new responsibilities, and then obligates us to pay for those, in this case, welfare for able-to-work adults, okay, they then begin to abdicate their responsibility for the things that way more people agree on, that criminals should serve out their sentences and we should have good roads for a good economy, to get goods to market and everything. Can you comment on that, what we're doing right now?
Well, I can tell you one thing that I've always believed, and I think we need to get back to it, because if we don't, we're going to be in real trouble, and that is the fact that government does not exist to create jobs. It does not exist to create health insurance. I mean, when you go back and read the original founders, what they said, government exists first and foremost for the purpose of protecting the inalienable rights we have. In fact, the Constitution says that to secure these rights, government are instituted among men. The government's not out there to create jobs. We can create an environment to make it more favorable, for the free market to work, and for people to create jobs, but not the government. That's not the government's responsibility. They've taken on way more than they're supposed to take than they were ever supposed to take on. That's not limited government.
Mm-hmm.
And let me give you a little example. I was looking the other day at, of course, I've been studying this higher ed, their budget, and it's amazing to me how many of these colleges across the country have set up. By the way, we're losing a lot of our First Amendment rights because some of these colleges are setting up free speech zones where they mark off an area, and if you've got anything to say that might be the least bit controversial, you have to rent that space and go in that 20 by 20 painted off area in order to say it. That's not good.
No, you're just getting us ready. They're getting us ready, getting the kids ready for when the government tries to do that on everybody, you know?
That's exactly right. And not only that, I was looking up some of the courses that most of our higher ed, and I'm not sure about Arkansas, I haven't looked at those, but you need to look at some of the courses that these higher ed colleges are teaching and charging tuition to these kids for teaching them. Let me just list you a few of them. One of them is tree climbing, pornography, female sexuality, maple syrup, history of the pig, learning from YouTube, surfing, bowling ball technology, Star Trek management, queer music ideology, packing boxes, Beatles, and puppeteers. Those are actual courses that are being taught in our higher ed universities. Now, in Arkansas, I looked at the graduation rates at our four-year institutions, somewhere in the low 30s. That's what we're graduating. From the time these kids start as freshmen, we're graduating only about a third of the students. In a two-year institution, it's lower than that. And yet we're pumping hundreds of millions of dollars into these higher ed institutions. That needs to be looked into. It really needs to be looked into.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that the graduation rates are low. Yeah, it does make sense.
Low.
I think at this point we have to assess every dollar that we're spending of other people's money. We need to make sure we're getting the most bang for the buck.
Well, we do, and only 27% of the students that graduate from college get a job that's related to the major that they took in college. So, you know, we really need, and we're behind. In fact, we're having a grand opening next week of a career center here in Paris that we started about 5 years ago. Representative Eubanks and myself were in on that to teach vocational skills. And why we've waited so long to get back, I think it should be taught in every high school in the state of Arkansas. Mm-hmm. Because, manufacturing has changed. Our whole society as far as industry has changed. Just different requirements for different skills, and we don't have those skills.
Well, yeah, so let's talk about that. Unemployment in Arkansas is at record lows, and yet we have a lot of these economic development deals that have been highly publicized in the paper, where, the governor has recruited these Chinese companies. They're going to get taxpayer incentives, local and state, to move here. And my question is, where are the jobs going to come from? Because we have a skilled labor crisis. And that comes from, not teaching these skills or vocations. So how are we going to fill these jobs, Gary?
I don't know. I really don't know how we're going to fill them, because we've really waited too long as far as preparing people for these skilled jobs. And I'm talking about jobs like electricians and heat and air, plumbing, robotics, just a lot of things that kids are interested in doing that might not be interested in going to a four-year school and getting a liberal arts degree, which will do them absolutely no good in the culture we live in today. So I don't really know how we're going to fill these jobs. Some of these companies like Greenway up in northeast Arkansas, and I've spoken to some of those executives, they're going out of state and recruiting people to come to Arkansas because Arkansas just doesn't have the skilled workforce.
Yeah, and that's a shame. I think it's just ignored.
It is ignored.
And
we talk about it, but we don't act on it.
Yeah, you're exactly right.
We talk about it. We put it off way too long. And
do you think some of the problem with the college culture, right now? I mean, I remember when I was in high school, there was this idea from a guidance counselor standpoint that you were only as successful as a guidance counselor depending on what percentage of the graduating high school class was accepted in going to college. And then it's like, okay, once you're in college, everything's fine, everything's dandy. And then you've got this concept where the colleges now, or the universities, they don't really have customers. They don't really treat the students. You're paying somebody money. They have a guaranteed clientele because you've got the government guaranteeing the loans, guaranteeing the debt the student's going to have once they get out of the institution. And now if you're saying only 30% are graduating here in Arkansas, that's very troublesome.
Well, it's hard for me to relate to that because my main incentive for being successful in college was a man called H.T. Stubblefield. He was about 6'1", 240 pounds, and he told me that if I didn't make it, then what I needed to do was get a job. And so that was my incentive for trying to be successful in college. And nowadays, I don't know what these kids are thinking. We have let me tell you something, Paul. I remember back in the 60s, the Supreme Court back in the early 60s, after listening to this liberal psychologist, they came up with their ruling to remove the Ten Commandments from all the classrooms. In other words, they determined that by listening to this liberal psychologist that a student who just took a casual glance at this passive document of the Ten Commandments could have a potentially negative impact on their children. Now, that's amazing logic, isn't it? I mean, imagine a child seeing the words, thou shalt not kill or thou shalt not steal, having a negative impact. We've been going down this road for about 50 or 60 years now. And when you look at the Supreme Court rulings back in the 60s when they removed Bible reading and prayer, even voluntary prayer, from the classrooms, and then you look at the charts on violent crimes, you look at the SAT scores, you look at the unwed mothers, pregnancy rates, teenage pregnancy rates, they all go straight up from the 60s until now. So, our whole culture has changed, and it's not changed for the better.
It's not a surprise, if you strip the Ten Commandments out and all of a sudden you have people that are not being confronted with the idea that they are accountable for what they do after they leave this world.
That's true.
Then if you're not under anyone's authority, then what do you care? You're your own God. You can make your own decisions.
But that's the reason the founders, they tried to make it plain that the legislative branch was the most important branch because that is the branch of government that's closest to the people, and they could be elected. When you've got these nine robed judges wearing black robes, who are supposed to be noble and virtuous, and in many cases no more than the average person, rewriting the entire Constitution in many cases, and they have. You go back in the 40s and look at some of those cases involving education, they have actually rewritten much of the Constitution.
Yeah, no doubt. We're out of time. Senator Gary Stubblefield from District 6, I always appreciate, it's always a pleasure having you on. You're one of the good guys fighting the limited government conservative fight. Just keep us posted on those budget hearings, and let me know what I can do to help to get the word out to the folks.
Well, I appreciate that, Paul. Thank you a lot.
All righty. Thank you. Be safe. Senator Gary Stubblefield, everybody. You're listening to Conduit News Radio. I'm Paul Harrell. I'll be back in just a moment.